Welcome to Talkin Maine with a Bow Tie Boy. I have my special guest here and my friend, Shenna Bellows, Secretary of State. Shenna, it's nice to have you. I was telling somebody, I have to share this with you, that when you served in the legislature, and I think I told you this, that you were mini-me, because I really worked hard, and most people up here know to recognize what people that I worked for. And you did the same. It was like every day I'd come into the Senate and you'd be up front taking some picture with somebody or a sentiment for somebody, and I'd laugh, oh boy, she's doing really great. So from somebody who does that, who did that, and watching someone like you do that, so important, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And I remember very vividly you giving me advice. You said if you're talking to 5 to 10 constituents a day, every day, then that's serving your community. That was great advice.
And at the end of the day, in the Senate, it should be in the House, it was 3 because you had a smaller district. But in the Senate, if you did 10 a day, at the end of the time, you multiply 365 days, you've touched everybody's life. Just a quick side story. When my opponent ran against me, when the seat was open, she knocked on doors, and every door she went in, there was some kind of postcard or sentiment from me hanging on the refrigerator. She said, how could you beat that? It doesn't matter. But it was fun, though. That's what people don't realize. What happens in Augusta stinks. Bad. But what happens out here is wonderful.
Agreed. 100%.
Oh, totally wonderful. So, Shenna, got an election coming up. 8 things are on the ballot. So I'm going to take my own quiz.
Okay.
All right. So question 1 is the notwithstanding bill that if passed, question 3 passes, question 1 comes into play, et cetera, and we'll explain that. I tried to explain that on the radio. Those of us in the legislature understand what notwithstanding is. Those out in the public think we're nuts. Question 2 is foreign money, being able to be involved in the election. Question 3 is Pine Tree Power, and in full disclosure, as you know, I'm working against Pine Tree Power, but I'm not going to offer my editorial comments. This is the time for you to talk about how the ballot is written. Question 4, this is where I get mixed up. Is this the constitutional amendment or okay, so I'm already failing the quiz. Well, one of them has to do with the tribes, and it has to do with language being put back into the Constitution, which right now is understood, but it's not there. Another question gives your group more time to certify a referendum, because you're getting hit with so many of them, and the time window is there. And after that, I draw a complete blank.
Well, good news for you, voting is not a test.
I'd be a deep doo-doo if I was. Holy mackerel.
So there are 8 questions on the ballot, and I brought with me today our handy dandy guide, the Citizen's Guide to Referendums. It's on our website, maine.gov/SOS.
Or if you do a search.
Or do a search for Citizen's Guide.
Citizen's Guide for State of Maine or Secretary of State of Maine. It'll take you to that page.
That's right.
And so you can find that, because some of these are just simple questions, right?
So the first 4 questions are all citizen-initiated petitions. People went out, they gathered signatures to get on the ballot.
Oh, the right to work. Right to
repair.
All right,
That's
so I got one more extra credit.
Yes.
I'm down to 2 I don't know.
So there are 4 citizens' initiatives. If you don't like the way the questions are worded, that's my fault. The Secretary of State takes the citizen initiative language. And the reason this Citizen's Guide is 63 pages of information.
Let me hold that up. 63 pages. I mean, that's why people say, well, it's only one question. No. It's like 16 pages long. If you really want to be informed, you really need to read through that. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. But this is a Citizen's Guide that can be found on the Secretary of State's page. And I'm sure Trinity and Andre will find a way to run that across the bottom so you can see that.
Wonderful. And then the last 4 questions are constitutional amendments. And maybe we talk about those first, because they're really simple.
And to explain the constitutional amendment, the legislature had to pass it with 2/3 vote.
That's right. It had to be bipartisan.
Bipartisan, and then that now goes out to the public. If they approve it, the Maine Constitution will be changed accordingly.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the citizens can initiate petitions that change the law, but only the legislature under the Maine Constitution can initiate a constitutional amendment to the Maine Constitution. But the legislature can't pass a constitutional amendment without the people ratifying it. So there are 4 constitutional amendments initiated in the legislature, and if they pass, it will change the Maine Constitution. 2 of those are housekeeping. So question 7 excuse me. Yes, question 7 and question 8.
Oh, you almost got the quiz. Oh,
And let me just interject. So voting is not a quiz. Voting is happening right now. Anyone can do absentee voting for any reason or no reason at all. It's called no excuse absentee voting. You can literally go down to your town hall or city hall and ask the clerk for a ballot, vote in person absentee anytime between now and the Thursday prior to Election Day. Of course, the weekend before Election Day, the clerks are getting ready. You can go online and request a ballot on our website. We have an online absentee ballot request site. You can call your clerk and request that that ballot be mailed to you, and then you can return it in person, by mail, and in many municipalities by an absentee ballot drop box. So it's really easy to vote. And so you can, if you're voting absentee, you can have that ballot at home, open up the Citizen's Guide, go online, read the questions, talk to your family or friends, and then fill out that ballot. If you're in the voting booth, you can actually bring the guide with you, or your own guide. Maybe you've done your homework ahead of time. A clerk asked me yesterday, if I give someone a ballot and then they say, well, I don't know how to vote, can I give them a copy of this guide? And I said, absolutely, yes. You can't have video or audio when you're behind that curtain in the polling booth, but you can have anything that you want with you that's paper or on your phone that you're reading to remind you how you thought you wanted to vote or what your values and beliefs are.
Is that true in any election? So
Yeah.
if I wanted to bring in, like I was going to vote for Shenna Bellows for president, and I wanted to remember what Shenna's stance was, I can bring in a little flyer. As long as somebody doesn't give it to me as I walk in the door.
Right.
But I can bring that as my own information to say, I want to remember, I'm deciding between the two. I want to compare them before I make the final check.
Absolutely.
That's good to know. I did not know that.
Yeah. So voting is not a test. It's just a reflection of your values and beliefs. So of the 4 constitutional amendments, there are 2 that I call housekeeping amendments. That's questions 7 and 8. By the way, the order of the questions is random. Citizens' initiatives always go first. Constitutional amendments always go second. But we literally drew it out of a hat on Facebook Live in front of the media. So questions 7 and 8 are just to update the constitutional language to reflect the reality. So it's important to know that the United States Constitution trumps state constitutions. And in fact, federal law can trump a state constitution. So question 7 is the issue of who can gather signatures for petitions.
Oh, that's right. We kind of went through this before,
Yeah.
where we kind of limited that Mainers are the only ones can circulate petitions, and there was a court case, and the court basically said anybody can, correct?
That's right. The court said under the First Amendment, people from outside the state have the right to say whatever they want to say. Here in Maine, they can say, please sign this petition, and hence that's why that constitutional language is unconstitutional. So the legislature decided to update the language of the Constitution to reflect the court decisions under the United States Constitution. Similarly, question 8, Maine is one of only 2 states in the nation where every citizen has the right to vote, no exceptions. Now, until 1965, Maine banned paupers and people under guardianship. In 1965, they struck the language from the Constitution that said paupers, that poor people couldn't vote.
Right.
And they changed the language around guardianship to say only people under guardianship by reason of mental illness could not vote. Well, in 2000, there were 3 individuals, Jane Doe, June Doe, and Jill Doe, that wanted to vote. They were under guardianship for reason of mental illness, but they had strong feelings about that presidential election. And they sued, and they won. The courts found that it is unconstitutional to say that someone under guardianship by reason of mental illness, the most notable example being Britney Spears, for example, that it was unconstitutional to say that they were prohibited from voting. So since 2001, when the court made that ruling, everyone in Maine has the right to vote. So the legislature decided, while they were doing constitutional amendments, to strike that language as well, so that people reading the Constitution would know what the reality is and what the law is. And again, the courts found that that violated equal protection and due process clauses under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. So that's what questions 7 or 8 are. Now, if voters reject it,
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
But
because it's just cleaner.
it's just cleaning up that language. That's why I call it housekeeping.
So there's, like you say, if it doesn't pass, the federal constitution, federal law overrides it, so it would be in place anyway. But this is so it's clear, so if someone is running or feels that a clerk misread it and didn't go to training or whatever and said, no, you can't vote, or a certifier of a petition, because a petition has to be certified by a notary or by a judge or by a lawyer, is if the notary says, oh, no, you had collected this and you're not from the state of Maine, the person doesn't have to get into an argument with them. It's very clear that it can be done.
That's right. And honestly, I think the Constitution, it's a source document. We tell people go to trusted sources of information. That language should be updated to make sure that it's correct. Now, there are 2 constitutional amendments that would make a difference, and you already mentioned question 5. And again, I made that joke about if you don't like the first 4 questions, that's my fault. If you don't like the second 4 questions, that's the legislature's fault, because they write the constitutional amendments.
So I want to make it clear, it's not you. You've done a really good job at doing this. I mean, I would hate there to try to take some of this stuff and try to write it into one sentence that people could vote on. And as you know, on question 3, you went through the debate about what quasi-government is, and it's like, oh, wow, I can't believe that. But anyway, that's another story. So you've done a really good job.
Well, thank
you and
you.
your staff have done a wonderful job pulling that together, because you have 2 lines basically that people have to be able to read that and say, okay, I think I understand.
Right.
Before I go. So don't flog yourself on that one.
Okay. So question 5, if I were to rewrite question 5, and question 5 says, do you favor amending the Constitution to change the time period for judicial review of the validity of written petitions from within 100 days of the date of filing, and I'm reading it from here, to within 100 business days from the date of filing of a written petition in the office of Secretary of State, with the exception for petitions filed within 30 calendar days before or after a general election. So what on earth does that mean? Here's how I would have written it if I'd had the opportunity. Do you think that there should be a 30-day blackout period before and after major November elections where the state elections office and the courts focus on running the election and take up petitions afterward? And the reason that we proposed this constitutional amendment to the legislature was because in 2022, we're running a high-stakes gubernatorial election, former Governor Paul LePage challenging current Governor Janet Mills. And the week before the election, when my 11 elections officials in my state office were already working overtime to make sure that clerks had what they needed to getting ballots out, et cetera, we get 2 petitions with more than 70,000 signatures on them each. And under the current Constitution that was changed in the early 1900s, we were supposed to drop everything and certify within 30 days.
Was one of them ours? I think it was.
One of them was Pine Tree Power. One of them was the ban on foreign spending.
It was the year before.
So it almost killed us. We put in extraordinary overtime. Unfortunately, people had to cancel their Thanksgiving holiday plans because the due date was the Monday after Thanksgiving for these petitions. Wow. And so we were successful. Maine should be so proud. We were #1 in the nation in 2022 for voter turnout. It was a free, safe, secure election. We did 3 legislative recounts, 1 county recount. We did all the ranked choice voting tabulation all before Thanksgiving with my team of 11 people killing themselves.
Is Julie still there?
She is. Deputy Secretary Julie Flynn.
Jeez. So she was there in 1820 too, I think. Don't say that, Julie. I'm only kidding.
As you might imagine, I lost a lot of those 11 people. After the election, they were like, thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Flynn. This was a great opportunity, but I don't want to miss out on Thanksgiving vacation again. I don't want to go through that type of stress. So it just about killed our team. And so we said, well, to the legislature, there needs to be some safeguards around presidential and gubernatorial elections. There needs to be just a small blackout period where we take those petitions, because it doesn't change when they're on the ballot. They're on the ballot this November. That wasn't going to change. The deadline for the petitioners is the end of January. They didn't, you don't have to turn them in the week before the election. Right. So it doesn't change the validity of the petitions or when the petitions are on the ballot. The only thing that it does is give us a little more time. And the reason judicial review is in there is, of course, we have 30 days to certify. If people disagree with us, they sue us. And the court has that 70-day window to make a decision.
And let me be clear with the way that you've run your office as Secretary of State. Just because the days are there, if something is done, you're done.
Absolutely.
So that is really important, and I've actually personally witnessed that, and I commend you tremendously and your staff for doing that. It's just because you have 100 days doesn't mean you're going to take 100 days.
Right.
You're going to do it as quickly as you can to get it out of there. So my hat's off to you, but this also helps you prepare so that you don't get stuck with something like this again.
That's right. And to be able to focus on running an election in a gubernatorial race or presidential race. Question 6 is, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to require that all of the provisions of the Constitution be included in the official printed copies of the Constitution prepared by the Secretary of State? So every 10 years, my office, Maine State Archives, prints the official copy of the Constitution, and that lives in archives forevermore. Well, in the late 1800s, the legislature in a constitutional convention recommended not printing certain sections of the Constitution that had to do with the Articles of Separation from Massachusetts. And included in those Articles of Separation were some of the treaty obligations with Wabanaki nations. So the Constitution was amended, and to our knowledge, it's the only Constitution in the country that has
exceptions.
An amendment that says this part shall not be printed. Now, in 2023, can you see those secret amendments?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's available online, and but I'm being asked again to print the official copy of the Constitution, and the question is, should I be printing these provisions as part of that document or not?
And it doesn't change anything with land claim cases or anything like that. It just simply says this was in the Constitution before, they took it out, but it's still in the Constitution. Will this affect, and this is kind of a surprise question to you, but like on public lands, we didn't put anything in the Constitution when we separated. But the way the public lands are supposed to be done is any money raised in the public lands is supposed to go to two things, churches or schools. Now later, the Supreme Court, and you may want to check into this, so it's a surprise, said that you could use the money to manage the land. Those are the only three things that money can be used for. But we didn't put it in the Constitution, but because it was in the Massachusetts Constitution, and we didn't exclude it on purpose, saying that doesn't count, it carried through. Just a question when you go back. Surprise.
Fun question.
Because I had to do the public lands subcommittee years
Right.
ago, and that was, and Paul LePage wanted to take that money and use it to buy wood stoves. And I thought it was a great idea, but you couldn't do it because the Constitution was very clear. So it'd be interesting to see if that language gets carried through too. So it's more than just the indigenous situation.
Oh, for sure. It is the Articles of Separation from Massachusetts.
So
these are fun questions,
Yeah.
right? And you can go to Maine State Archives. You can look at the original Maine Constitution. You can look where they crossed it out. They crossed
wow.
out pieces that, like, they literally put lines through and made changes. So originally, it's just really interesting to see those original documents.
Wow.
It's fun. So those are the constitutional amendments.
All right, so let's move on to the other four questions.
So the other 4 questions.
So we do them in a different order because 1 and
We
3
can start
are
with we can do 1 and 3 together.
1 and 3 together.
Sure. So question 3, I think, is where the most money is being spent. And to be clear, I'm not going to express a perspective on any of these questions. We weighed in as Secretary of State. I did weigh in on the 4 constitutional amendments because all of them pertain to our work in printing the Constitution and implementing the constitutional obligations around petitions. We do not have a position on questions 1 through 4. Question 3, do you want to create a new power company governed by an elected board to acquire and operate existing for-profit electricity transmission and distribution facilities in Maine? So that's question 3. It's commonly referred to as Pine Tree Power. And there are certainly lots of ads for or against Pine Tree Power on TV. And I think what's really also important is people can go to the Citizen's Guide and they can read the law between Pine Tree Power. So for example, it would be Chapter 40 in law. You can read the actual statutory language and you can make a decision. Does this make sense to me or not? Do I agree or disagree? We also in the guide have some fiscal analyses of the various bills. So that's question 3.
So I just want to be clear. So
Yeah.
did you understand? And again, I too am not going to make any value statement
Yeah.
about it, but there's 16 pages in that one. So you should take the time to read it, because you can sort out what you believe we've heard on TV and what you haven't by reading those 16 pages, because things are there that you should be aware of. No, and that's typical of all things. Just
That's right.
Again, like we said in the beginning, just because it's one sentence or a run-on sentence, your English teacher will be very upset with you. They didn't send it to that person, but that sentence represents 16 pages. So
That's right.
take the
And so, yeah, absolutely. The Office of the Attorney General prepared an objective intent and content. So that just describes, from the Attorney General's perspective, what the legislation would require. It's a summary. And then the Treasurer and the Office of Fiscal Program and Review created official fiscal impact statements that are also in the Citizens Guide. There may be other fiscal impacts, but the official fiscal impact statement, the official costs of the ballot question, are in the Citizens Guide. So I think that's really important for people to
I do believe the public advocate has weighed in too, and I assume that their document is available for people to read online somewhere.
Again, that's right. You can go to source documents to look at what government agencies are laying forward, and you can go to the 2 campaigns. Right. You can certainly, there's lots of information on this one.
So, and that one has got a very important, that's why it leads us into question 1, which the language in here says, notwithstanding any other, and this is Tom's explanation, that's passed, is that they can borrow a certain amount of money without the people's approval. And that's in question 3.
So, again, definitely take a look at the language for the bill, because it is significant in terms of the legal language. So there is language around existing obligations. There is language around no use of state funds or tax dollars. Debt or liability is not a general obligation or moral obligation of the state. There's language around property and income tax status, around cost of service rates. The rates and all other charges of the company must be sufficient to pay in full the cost of service, including the cost of debt and property taxation. And there is language around how that acquisition would happen, and agreement. So within 45 days, which the purchase price is either mutually agreed upon by the company and the investor-owned transmission and distribution utility, or is finally determined through the judicial process set forth under paragraph B. So there is a lot of legal language, and it's important. So it's, the proponents of the bill thought carefully about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to achieve Pine Tree Power, and they wrote this bill. Then the legislative office looks at the language, made some minor edits for form's sake, to place it in statutory form, and then we return it to the proponents. They sign off on it. Then they start gathering signatures. Once they've gathered the requisite signatures and we approve that, we certify it for the ballot, then I draft a question. Of course, in this case, I was sued, and the question was modified, and that's the question on the ballot.
Okay, so now with time, let's move to question 1.
Right.
Because this is where it gets kind of flaky, because you have notwithstanding. And in the legislature, that meant we could pass a law and we could write notwithstanding in it, meaning if there was another law that potentially said no, we could say, well, notwithstanding that, this law will take place. That's my simple explanation. So question 1 tells people that before there's money borrowed of a significant amount, we, the people of Maine, will have to vote on that.
So question 1 says, do you want to bar some quasi-governmental entities and all consumer-owned electric utilities from taking on more than $1 billion in debt unless they get statewide voter approval? Again, question 1 is the legal language on that is 2 pages, but it is a little bit more complicated than the single question. And I think that's important for people to recognize. The question itself is not the law. The law is the law, and what we try to do when we draft these questions, and it's not just me, it's a committee, but is to summarize what the law would do. And that's what question 1 would do. So question 1 and question 3 in some ways are at odds with one another. Question 3 empowers Pine Tree Power to acquire these investor-owned transmission and distribution utilities. Question 1 places that limitation that there would have to be a statewide referendum if any, and it's actually not just Pine Tree Power, but any consumer-owned electric utility was taking on more than $1 billion in debt. They would have to get statewide voter approval.
And it's not your job to decide which one plays. It ultimately, if both pass, there'll probably be some kind of a law case that will find out what the end is about which is applicable. Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
That's true. Of course, with the corridor question in 2021, that went to the courts. The courts ended up finding that although it was voter approved, it violated the law and the Constitution, and it was overturned.
Yeah.
And that may happen on any of these first 4 questions. That's, we think about the 3 branches of government, right? The legislative branch makes laws, the executive branch interprets them, the judicial branch evaluates their appropriateness in line with the Constitution.
So the other 2 questions that were referendums, one is the right to repair, and the other one is the amount of money that one foreign government can put into an election, correct?
So question 2 is actually a ban. Do you want to ban foreign governments and entities that they own, control, or influence from making campaign contributions or financing communications for or against candidates or ballot questions? That's question 2.
And it's already true, isn't it already true about candidates, I believe?
Right, you can't, that's true. Under federal law, a candidate cannot receive a contribution from someone who's not an American citizen, from a foreign national. So that's pretty clear in federal law. There have been prosecutions sometimes under federal law.
But in this case, it's going to clarify that money can't come in. And one election I was involved in, it was about $75 million that was put in or 25 from a foreign entity. So that's a question that has been. I assume that's a pretty short.
Yeah. So we can open up the Citizens Guide, the 63-page Citizens Guide, and see exactly again how long that language is.
It's pretty significant.
It's not insignificant. It's
7 pages.
We got 4 pages here of legal language. So they're definitions, right? What is a foreign, the definition of contribution, electioneering, the prohibition.
Yeah. So it defines what they mean by it.
Yeah, and then there is something that we didn't capture in the question itself. It makes it a Class C crime. That's here. So there is a piece here that also directs, if this passes, it directs the congressional delegation to also sponsor or co-sponsor in Congress a joint resolution proposing pursuant to the United States Constitution, Article 5, an anti-corruption constitutional amendment. Now, the people cannot legally tell Congress, they can tell Congress what they want them to do, and that this would send that communication to the Maine congressional delegation. It doesn't have the legal effect of requiring that Senators Collins or King or Representatives Golden or Pingree do anything or not do anything.
And it would be an indication. Jared's already done something or trying to. The last question.
That's right. Question 4. And this one's a hot topic. So I think, questions 3 and question 4 are the 2 questions where, I haven't done any analysis or data, but when you're looking online and seeing, the ads coming at you or I'm sure the Maine Ethics Commission has some data on what's being spent for and against the various questions. Question 4 is the other question. And I did get some critique from opponents on this question, but I think they didn't realize that the critique is supposed to come when I first draft the question. They can give me comments or they can sue me. They didn't, but here's the question. Do you want to require vehicle manufacturers to standardize onboard diagnostic systems and provide remote access to those systems and mechanical data to owners and independent repair facilities? That's the question. Again, this is another one where the legal language is complex. There is a lot of legal language. It's 4 pages here, and you can read this on our website. It's not a secret. What does access to diagnostic systems mean? Well, it's defined here in the law. What is that remote mean. And actually, there are different rules around different model years for the vehicles in the law itself. As we were evaluating how to write this question, we felt that it would be too complex to talk about model year 2002 motor vehicles versus model year 2002 to 2017 vehicles versus model year 2018 and later motor vehicles. But those rules are differentiated in that law. And then, of course, there's a section on required equipment that the vehicles are required to have if they're going to be sold in the state of Maine. And then the enforcement authority is through the Office of the Attorney General, and that is also detailed in the law. And then notice to consumers and to the independent repair facilities.
And the state of Massachusetts passed something first. They're
They
the only
did.
other state that's there. And the way I think about it is that systems are becoming so computerized in your car that you need to be able to access, because now you can plug in and it tells you what's wrong. The independents feel like they're being excluded from that. Those that propose them think that that's some proprietary information that they don't have to share. People will decide. Ultimately, that might end up in court too.
That will
Most
probably
likely.
end up in court as well. I believe the Massachusetts law is being challenged
right, yeah.
as well. So, and it's, these questions are so interesting. There are genuine philosophical debates for and against each question. Reasonable people can agree to disagree on how they're going to vote. But I think for voters, I don't care how you vote. We just want you to vote.
Back when we vote, and I'm sure you said the same thing when you ran. I used to say, I don't care if you vote for me. Just show up and vote. People have sacrificed their lives to give us that right. I physically go vote. I don't get an absentee ballot because, to me, that's the day I need to vote to those people in memory of those people who defended this country and our right to vote. Shenna, this is fantastic. You are great.
I had such a good time on the show.
You have no enthusiasm at all. That's what I... Shenna Bellows,
you.
Secretary of State, thank you so much for coming in. And we'll give you this so you can link it up. And anything that you can add with these guys that they'll put on there, they will do that. But this is great. Went a little long today, but I think it's important you all need to know that. And we'll see you next time on Talkin.